Hello and welcome to this session, and in this session we shall continue our understanding of programming through pattern programming. Up until now in this video series, what you have been able to understand is that this command is going to be printing a single star on the screen, but then just in case I bring in a loop that shall loop from 1 to 5, which means that it shall be doing 5 iterations, shall be producing 5 stars on a single line like this. Well, this is what is a horizontal line of 5 stars. But then you know that if this program has to execute, then all of these attachments will have to be brought in. But then in case I need to have a vertical line of 5 stars, then you know that this happens to be the print command that is going to be printing a single star. But then you also know that the cursor shall be blinking besides it. And if you'll really have to bring in this cursor to the new line, then you need to be bringing in this print command. And now you know that these two lines of code shall not only be printing a star, it shall also ensure that the cursor moves to the new line. And just in case I bring in a loop around this, then obviously this loop shall ensure that we would be getting 5 stars vertically. Well, all of this is something that you have already understood previously, and now in this session what we will have to do is to proceed and understand as to how we can create a square of stars. We will also in this session understand as to how we can create a rectangle of stars. Well, all of this is what we need to be understanding in this session, so let me proceed. Even before I dive deep and tell you as to how we can be creating a square of stars and a rectangle of stars, let me revisit this piece of code. Well, I am sure that you understand that this piece of code shall be creating 5 horizontal stars. But then what I really want you to focus on this code is the initial and the final value of the loop index variable. Well, you can notice that the loop index variable j has been initialized to 1 and the upper limit of the loop index variable j happens to be 5. Well, this is precisely the reason as to why this loop is going to be executing 5 times, and each time the print command shall get executed printing a star, and overall what we shall be getting is a horizontal line of 5 stars. Well, that way have a look at this scale. You have 0 at the center, and then on the positive side you have 1, 2, 3, 4 and numbers so on. Similarly, on the negative scale, we shall be having -1, -2, -3 and so on. Well, on this scale, if you would carefully notice, what we have made use of is this region. Yes, the initial value of j is 1 and the final value of j is 5, which is why I said that the loop is going to be iterating 5 times. But then I can also move it slightly ahead like this. In other words, in case you are going to set the j value initially as 2 and the final value of j as 6, even then what you shall be getting on the output screen is 5 stars. Well, your upper limit may be 6, but then the initial value happens to be 2, which means that between 2 to 6 there are 5 numbers, and hence we say that this is also going to be producing 5 stars on the screen. Or that way I can also slightly move it ahead. And now you can notice that just in case our initial value of j happened to be 3 and the final value of j happened to be 7, even then upon execution of this program, what I shall be getting is a line of 5 horizontal stars. Well, that way I have not made use of this, rather what I have made use of is the initial value of j as 1 and the final value of j as 5. Now, why am I saying all of this to you? Well, let me tell you that normally the loop index variables do not begin with 1. Rather, they begin with 0. Well, moving forward, I shall be telling you as to why really the loop index variables are going to be beginning with 0, but then particularly in pattern programming, the loop index variable should begin with 0. Well, you know that if really the initial value of our loop index variable j happens to be 0, then the upper limit shall be 4. Just because the upper limit is 4, you should not be of the opinion that 4 stars shall be getting printed. After all, 0 to 4 is going to be making the loop iterate 5 times, and even in this case, upon execution, what I shall be getting is a horizontal line of 5 stars. Well, that way, some of you might be thinking that just in case I take it a step back, like the initial value of j as -1 and the final value of j as 3. Will even this produce a horizontal line of 5 stars? Well, it may be mathematically producing a horizontal line of 5 stars, but one thing that I would wish to caution you is that the loop index variables, particularly in pattern programming, shall always begin with 0. Negative loop index variables are illegal in most of the programming languages. So that way, you should never consider the option of -1 to 3. What you should ideally consider is the option of 0 to 4, and obviously even 0 to 4 actually sums up to 5 iterations, and hence this piece of code is also going to be producing us with the same output. So all said and done, through this discussion, what you have been able to understand is that no doubt you can be having the initial value of j as 1 and the final value of j as 5 and get the required output, but then ideally you should always start your loop index variables, particularly in pattern programming, from 0, which means that the upper limit of j is going to be 4, and this loop shall definitely give us 5 stars on the same line. Hope I am clear with my explanation. Now that you have understood as to what really is the ideal initial value for the loop index variable, have a look at this piece of code. Well, I am sure that by looking at this piece of code, you can easily understand that it is going to be producing a vertical line of 5 stars. But then what I am concerned is about the initial and the final value of the loop index variable. No doubt, the loop index variable from 1 to 5 shall be producing 5 stars vertically as per this program code, but then you know that ideally loop index variables, particularly in pattern programming, has to be starting from 0. Now, why it has to be starting from 0 is something that I shall be telling you in this session, but then at this point in time, in case you are going to be making your initial value of j as 0, then obviously the upper limit will have to be 4, and upon execution of this, we would definitely get a vertical line of 5 stars. Hope I am completely clear with my explanation. Anyway, now it's time for me to proceed and tell you as to how we can be creating a square and rectangle of stars. Have a look at this geometrical shape. After all, it's a square of 5 stars. I hope you agree with me. But then, how do I write it programmatically? Well, if I will have to write it programmatically, then let me explain it to you in simple steps as to how you can achieve it. Firstly, I need to be printing the first star. And if I will have to print this first star, then obviously this happens to be the printf command. Well, you know that this printf command can after all print only a single star. It cannot be printing a square of 5 stars. So what should I do next? Well, what I really have to do is firstly, I need to be printing the first row of 5 stars. And if I'll really have to print the first row of 5 stars, all that I have to do is to bring in a for loop like this. Well, you have already understood this loop previously, just that I don't want to have the lower limit as 1 and the upper limit as 5. Rather, I would wish to have it as 0 to 4. Well, you already know that even though I am giving the upper and the lower limits as 0 and 4 respectively, still this piece of code happens to be such a piece of code which is going to be printing a horizontal line of 5 stars. Well, a horizontal line of 5 stars will definitely get printed, but then where would the cursor be? Obviously, after printing 5 stars, the cursor is going to be just besides the 5th star. And if you really have to get a square of stars, then it is your responsibility to be bringing this cursor to the new line now. And what is the command to bring the cursor to the new line? Well, I'm sure all of my learners know that printf/n happens to be the command that is going to be bringing the cursor to the new line. But my question to you is, where should I be placing this command? Should I be placing this printf/n command below the printf star within the body of the for loop, or should I be placing this printf/n command after the for loop concludes? Where should I really be placing it? Let me explain. I'm sure that by now my learners would have understood as to what really is the proper code, but then firstly, let me take the first case. In this case, you know that the printf/n command is present within the body of the for loop, and this happens to be such a piece of code that we have previously already explored. This is going to be printing a line of vertical stars. Obviously, the print command is going to print the star, and the printf/n command present just below the print command will take the cursor to the new line, which means that the loop is going to be printing a vertical line of stars. After all, in my previous session, I have had a detailed discussion on this, and definitely printing a vertical line of star is not what we want this time. So this definitely is ruled out. And now if I would look at the next scenario, then you know that this print command is going to print a single star, and then this for loop around it shall ensure that all the remaining stars shall get printed on the same line, and the cursor would keep blinking at the end of the first row. And then once the control comes out of the loop, I will have to be taking this cursor to the new line, and that is what precisely the printf/n command outside the for loop shall achieve. In other words, what this piece of code is going to do is that it shall print 5 stars, and then after printing 5 stars, it takes the cursor to the new line. Well, that is what this piece of code is going to do. But then I've still not got a square of 5 stars. How to achieve a square of 5 stars? Let me proceed and explain it to you. If I will have to get a square of 5 stars, then obviously I need to be repeating this activity. What I mean to say is that even on the next row, I would wish to print 5 stars and then take the cursor to the new line. And you know that this is the piece of code that shall be achieving it. But then what I really have to do is to repeat this again, meaning that in the next row as well, I need to be printing 5 stars and then take the cursor to the new line, which means that it is the same piece of code that I need to be repeating all over. And then again in the 4th row, I need to be printing 5 stars and then take the cursor to the new line, which means that the same code will have to be repeated again. And finally, on the next row as well, I need to be printing 5 stars and take the cursor to the new line, which means that this happens to be the code that I need to be using again. In other words, now you can notice that all of these lines of code shall be producing the required output on the screen. But then upon execution, would I really get the output? Obviously no. You know that this is still incomplete. In other words, if I will bring in the required attachments like this and then execute, obviously I would be getting a square of 5 stars. Hope I am clear with all of this, but I also know that some of my learners would have already started to think that this is an inefficient way of coding. And if you happen to be one such learner who is of this opinion, then let me tell you that you are perfectly correct by identifying the mistake in the style of coding in this program. This indeed is an inefficient way of coding. If you are able to realize and recognize that, then let me also tell you that you are indeed gradually transforming to become an efficient programmer. Let me also tell you that programming is an art. Any art can be mastered only with practice and with dedication. And if you are one such learner who feels that this style of coding is inefficient, then let me tell you that yes, it is inefficient. And why am I saying this inefficient is because after all, the lines of code in each of the boxes happen to be the same. And there is no need for us to be having the same piece of code typed 5 times in a given program. Obviously, it is pretty frustrating. So is there a way to optimize it? Yes, of course. Loops come into play again to optimize this, but then how to use a loop is something that I shall be telling you in this scenario. But all said and done, what I would wish to say is that even this inefficient coding as well can produce us with the required output. But then how to optimize this? Let me explain. If I will have to optimize this code, then obviously I should not be having 5 pieces of the same code. Rather, I would just have 1 piece of it. But then you know that this needs to be looped 5 times, which is why I shall enclose it within a loop. Well, you can notice that I have made use of the for loop. Well, that way you can also make use of the while loop, but then I have here made use of the for loop, and you know that irrespective of the loop that we make use of, every loop shall contain something called as the initialization, something called as the condition, and then incrementation. And you also know that loops are normally associated with the loop index variables. Well, you know that I have already made use of the loop index variable j, and hence I should not be making use of the same loop index variable for this loop. Rather, I will be making use of the loop index variable I, which means that in initialization, I shall have the loop index variable I. In condition as well, I shall have I, and also in incrementation, I shall be having I. And now I need to set up this loop such that the box inside or the code inside is going to get executed 5 times, which means that I can initialize my I value to 1 and I can keep on looping as long as I is less than or equal to 5, and each time as the loop progresses I have to increment I by 1. Well, this is the way if I would write the code, then you can notice that there is no repetition and yet we would be getting the required output. Obviously, I will have to declare the variable I as well, and upon execution, you can notice that I am indeed able to get the required output. So I'm sure all of you have been able to understand this piece of code, but then I know already a few of you would be thinking that why is it that I'm again using the range 1 to 5? Why am I not beginning from 0? Well, if really that is the question at the back of your mind, then you are perfectly right. I should not be making use of the index starting from 1 and go up to 5. Rather, here as well, I shall be using the range 0 to 4 like this. Well, you know that even 0 to 4 shall ensure that the code inside gets executed 5 times, and upon execution, you can notice that we are indeed getting the right output. So all said and done, I'm sure now you have been able to understand as to how in an optimized manner you can write the code, and you can see that this code is concise. Definitely for somebody who understands programming, it is not going to be a difficult thing to understand as to what actually is happening in this. But then if you would look at the code from outside towards inside, that is when it looks complicated. But then if you would look at it from inside, in the sense that this print command is going to print a single star and the inner loop is going to print 5 stars, and then this print command shall ensure that the cursor comes to the next line after printing the 5 stars, and then the outer loop is something that it shall repeat this activity 5 times, and hence we would be able to get a square of 5 stars. Hope it is completely clear. So I'm sure that in this session you have indeed been able to understand as to how these nested loops shall enable you to be creating a square of stars. But then I'm sure you are also eagerly awaiting to learn as to how you can be creating a rectangle of stars. Not just that, I'm sure that most of my learners also would be really interested in knowing as to why a loop index variable should not be having an initial value of 1. Why should it really be starting with 0? Well, if all of these queries are bothering you, then all that you really need to do is to continue watching this video series. Hope this session was informative. Let's meet again in my next session. Thanks for watching.